And welcome to this tutorial of editing in Audacity for podcasting. Okay, what we'll go through is importing files. So this is after the actual podcast recording session, if you will. We'll import those files, we'll edit them, we'll arrange them, we'll mix them, we'll adjust the volumes, and we'll export everything as a finished podcast to wow the world with your podcast prowess. Okay, let's do this. Import first our audio. We've already recorded our audio, and we want to make sure that we have good audio. So what did we do? We probably requested that our guest, I'm navigating to the folder where these files live, by the way, what we did was requested that our guest record on their end. How did they do that? Well, best case scenario, they also downloaded Audacity and they have their files ready to go. Or maybe even they held up a phone and put it somewhere, maybe out of screen on a little stand, a little clip-on stand, something like this. This is actually a clip that you can get in a music store to hold your phone, so you can put lyrics on your phone if you're on stage. But some other way to record their audio than Zoom. That's where I was going with all that. Then Zoom or other conference interface. Now, if you're using a specialized conference interface like Riverside or Squadcast or something like that, then you're golden because that records locally. But still, they would probably need a USB mic or a mic with a small interface or something, just so the audio quality is better. Zoom is not good quality, and we're zoomed out. People are just so tired of. At this point, we're in May of 2021. People are so zoomed out and tired of that audio quality. Plus, it's a podcast, and you want to make it a positive experience for your listeners. So, disclaimer aside, we've got our audio imported into Audacity. I'll run through that real quick. Import, go to Import under File, choose Audio. The best thing you can do after you get your audio from your guest and from your session is to save it inside your session folder so you always know where it is and where it lives. So I've already done that, so we don't need to do that. And what I've also done, just listen to this. How hilarious is that? Well, you can adjust your levels to your desired level of hilarity, but the only reason I did that is so we can tell if I'm doing playback when my stand-in podcast audio stops and where the guest audio starts. Here's a quick example. Actually, me. So in that example, I stopped talking and I or my guest started talking. So you understand where I'm coming from. Let's go ahead and import our music as well. If you have music, it's a good idea to have music. However, make sure that you have secured the rights to your music. It can be uncomfortably inconvenient, let's say, to be using music and discover that you don't have the rights to it and you get a cease and desist or someone threatens to sue you or charge you for the use of the music. So don't pull your favorite Eagles tune, random pull, your favorite Meshuggah tune, whatever kind of music you like. Don't do that. Okay, let's let us go ahead and mute the music for now. We're not going to need that right away. And we're primarily going to be paying attention to this top music track for arrangement purposes. Okay. What we have here is a bunch of extraneous audio that we don't need. So what we're going to do is clean that up. You could just hit delete by hitting the delete key, but then it snaps. Not a big deal in this situation because we can always go to our time shift tool and slide it back, can't we? However, I'm going to undo, which is Command-Z, and put it right back where it was, and Command-Z to restore that audio file. Actually, that extra undo, I undid the import of the music. So, but what we want to do is get rid of this part of the audio without deleting it. And we're doing that because I'll jump up to this top track. Let's say you wanted to delete all this space. But you did not want this portion to move. Well, once again, if you, I dragged too far down there. If you highlight that area and hit delete, it snaps. We don't want that. We want it to stay where it is. So what we're going to do down here to get rid of this audio is go to Edit, Clip Boundaries, and, Remove Special, and Split Delete. So Remove Special, Split Delete. It deletes the extraneous audio or whatever you have highlighted and leaves it in place. So we're pretty good to go there. Now let's go ahead and turn on our music here. This is our music bed. This is the first part of the music bed, which is essentially an introduction to the music and to the podcast. So we'll let that play. But that's where the music actually starts. In radio, we used to call that the post, trying to hit the post before the vocals came in. And what we want to do here is, I just unsoloed the music there. That's why all the tracks became active. What we want to do there is line up the podcast audio pretty much where after the music starts and establishes itself, we want the host audio to come in right there. Okay, so that's pretty much what we have. I'll mute this bottom track before I move it and let you see what I'm talking about. Let's see here. We'll go back to the beginning. If I hit play. This is my host audio. This is the audio. Okay, so there's the example for that. Like I said, that's just a placeholder. So now what we need to do is let's go ahead and zoom out with our magnifying glass and the minus symbol on there. Go ahead and move with the time shift tool. We're going to move this track, this outro track. This is the intro track right here. This is the outro track that we're going to play at the end of the podcast. When we imported it, it made a new stereo track, but I like to have my music together on one track. And I'll show you why when we get into mixing. So I just went to the time shift tool here, clicked on it, and dragged it up into this track. That's all we did. So we will go to the X on this empty track and delete it. And we want a nice clean workspace here. So what we're going to do is go to View and choose Track Size, Fit to Height. And we're going to fill that space. Okay? Pretty minor. Pretty minor consideration, but I like a nice clean workspace where there's not a lot of dead space and stuff. Speaking of dead space, all this stuff back here. Well, let's address that. If we wanted to just show what we're working on, and assuming we had no files living out here in the Kuiper belt, as it were, let's hit this right here. This is Fit Project to Width. Okay, hit that, and all that dead space is gone. Okay, now we need to line up the music, not line up, but establish how much music we want to be using. So we've got our intro here. This track is serving as our guest audio, so we don't need all this music down here. This music bed was produced way too long just to have plenty all the time. So what we want to do is you can listen and decide how much music you want playing under your host audio. This is the audio of me as a host of this podcast. You can listen and decide, or you can just eyeball it. Usually it's a few seconds, 5-10 seconds or so, and it's going to be fading down eventually. So what we're going to do is hot click there, place our cursor, and drag the extent of that region and just hit delete. Now this is going to snap back to the space, the void that was left, but we don't need to worry about that because we are going to move it anyway. We've got our guest audio. We've got our host audio. This is the beginning and the guest audio and the end of the podcast. So now what we'll do is place our music bed at the end of the podcast. So let's do that. And I know that I like to play that intro that I was talking about earlier, which is this point right here, this intro part of the music. I like to play that under the end of the podcast to sort of signal to the listeners that the end is coming. Yes, literally, but not in the apocalyptic sense, just the fact that the podcast is soon going to be over and they must move on with their lives and find other things to do. So we've got this established pretty much where we want. If we zoom in, let's place our cursor. You got to place your cursor wherever you want the session to react to just about anything. Place our cursor and zoom in. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Maybe even tighten it up just a little bit. Go back to our time shift tool. Like a nice tight transition here. So let's play that. Now, keep in mind, the music is going to be a little bit too loud originally until we mix it, but we're just getting everything settled and in its right place. So let's go to the timeline here. If you go to the timeline and click, it will instantly start playing from there. So let's check this out. Of me, the host, who is also me. If this is very confusing, rest assured it will always be. Okay? Now, if that works for you, you can leave it right there. Let's get even fancier. That chord, that one hanging chimey chord hits right here. We could tell that. We can tell by looking at it because it's a big sound, and you get used to looking at waveforms. But we can just listen to it. We know that right here is where that chord comes in. So let's place that strategically right under where, and we can place our cursor. If you want, you can just place your cursor there, hold it, and drag down, and it will tell you exactly where it is, without relying on a marker or anything like that. So let's go ahead and play that from there. Again, we go to our timeline and just click play, and it will automatically start playing. The podcast of me, the host, who is also me. If this is very confusing, rest assured it will always be. Let's assume I didn't say it will always be, but rather I said a very polite closing and said, thank you very much for listening. Please be sure to review, share, subscribe, etc., etc. That's a more appropriate ending on a podcast. No? Yes. So we've got everything in place. How long do we want that music to play? Let's see. Let's take it out right there. So we can split that. We can do that a number of different ways. We can either click and hold and drag this to the end of the region and hit delete, or we can place it, go up to edit, clip boundaries, split, or as you see here, the shortcut is Command I. So let's do that. Let's place the cursor, hit Command I. I'm on a Mac. BT Dub. I'm on a Mac. Everything's there in Windows machine as well. Just might be slightly different as far as the nomenclature of the shortcuts. Now, let's go back to our selector tool and go to this region down here that we have just split, double click it, and hit delete. So now that's gone. So now let's go back to auto width or fit project to width to get a good look. Everything looks pretty tight. Okay, that looks nice. So now we're going to mix. We're going to adjust the volume of the music under the intro. And if you have a produced intro, let's say you have this music and maybe you've got a canned intro that you use, this is how you'll produce that as well. And then you just import that into your session and put it right before your actual dialogue, and you're good to go. So let's go to our envelope tool. This is where we start mixing levels. Go to the envelope tool, click on that. And when you do that, you see that these envelope lines show up on either side of your files. You got a stereo file here. It shows up on both channels. You got a mono file here. Shows up on the top and the bottom. What we want to do is start bringing this music down under our host audio at the beginning of the podcast dialogue. So let's click here right before this host audio. We're going to click there and set our anchor. Now, before we do anything else, let's go ahead to the end. This is basically the inverse action that we're doing here, and set an anchor there. It moves a little bit. It's very sensitive. So let's go ahead and click it. There we go. Now, if we go back to the host audio in the beginning here and this intro, what we want to do is bring this audio down. So we do that by coming off to the side, to the right a little bit in this case, and clicking on that envelope line and hold it and bring it down. And I like to bring the fade down under the host audio or the guest audio, but not before it, like not necessarily there. You don't want it to come down all the way before the voice comes in. Make it a little bit more subtle. So bring it in gradually. That way, if we go up to the timeline and click, this is my host audio. This is the audio of me as a host of this. Okay. So that's pretty good. We do the same thing over here, but to the left of your anchor, click, pull down, make it about the same volume as you see over there on the left. Okay, and release it, and it'll stay right there. If you want, you can go back and adjust it. If you don't like it, you can always adjust it. So we'll leave it right about there. Go ahead and click on our timeline. The guest who is me for coming on my podcast, the podcast of me, the host who is also me. If this is very confusing, rest assured it will always be. Okay, I'm hitting spacebar to stop and start for that matter. And so we're good to go. We've got everything set. However, do we want the music here to just stop abruptly? Like this. I am about to lead a video. It's a little awkward. And do we want it to fade in from here? Podcast, the podcast of me. The answer in my mind, you do it however you want, is I want it to fade out here, subtle as it eases us into the episode. And I want it to start, have a hard start, if you will, here. Because it notifies the audience, as I said, that, oh, okay, we're coming to the end. Time to start going off and doing my laundry or getting back to work, whatever it is. Podcast, the podcast of me, the host who is... So we'll leave that, and we'll come back here and address this one. Now, what we can do with this fade in, we can do it a couple different ways. Either set another anchor, and then click here and pull down until... And if you go back and forth, you can see you adjust the fade. Until it, diminishes to nothing. Command-Z. Command-Z, and we're back where we started. That's undo. Or you can also choose the region to, you need our selector tool here. Choose the region, i.e. the length of the fade, and it will snap into place here. That's going to be my fade. And then we go to Effect, Fade Out. Fade in is obviously from the other side. Fade out, and there we are. It made a fade. So let's go ahead and play that. Of me as a host of this podcast, I am about to lead. If you want it longer, make it longer. It's totally up to you. But now we've essentially got our episode ready to go. So now we can go to export it. File, export as MP3. The standard for podcasts is 128 kilobits per second. You want to choose average in Audacity. That it monitors the average bit rate overall in the file and averages it out to 128. That's what you want. I'm pointing into a different session here. I want to make sure we're pointing into our session folder. I like to make a new folder. I also work in Pro Tools, and they call that bounced files. So I just use that for my bounce name, and then we hit save, and it's going to tell me. I like to leave this warning up because sometimes if you're converting files or using multiple files and you want to keep those original files, you can export them as individual files. This is just telling me this is going to mix down to one stereo file. Is that okay? And I say, yeah, that's okay. Okay, so it just bounced that out. And again, I'm on a Mac, so I go to Finder. Let's go back into our bounced files just to make sure. We will hit play just to double check. This is my host audio. This is the audio of me as a host of this. Okay, that's good. Ignore that name. I've got a different name in the metadata here. So nothing went wrong. Well, I did, but okay, and here's the outro. If this is very confusing, rest assured it will always be. Pause. Back that up just a little bit so you can hear the music established. Podcast, the podcast of me, the host who is also me. If this is very confusing, rest assured it will always be. I just remembered something. We didn't do our fade. We did not do our fade on the end of the podcast. I got ahead of myself. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll let the music establish. Click over to here, snap to the end, go back to effect, out. There we go. Okay. So now we should be good to go. I'm gonna export that again. Stuff like this happens all the time, and sometimes you get the whole thing bounced out and listen to it and then say, oh, there's something I didn't do. And go back and fix it just like that. So here we go. Save. Do you want to replace it? Yes, please. You know, replace it. One stereo file. Yes, please. Okay. Now we should be good to go. Let's go back into that same file. It's a happy little land inside that folder because all the files are in there. They all get along. You can tell I think about this way too much. Hit play. There's the beginning. I'm going to jump down in my slider here to the end. Okay, there we go. Nice clean fade. Nice clean session. All right. There are other things we could have done when it comes to moving files around. We'll talk about that in a different video. It's called the sync lock, where you lock down certain tracks. It's very helpful when you're working with large groups of files and tracks. Not so necessary for something of this size, but we'll talk about that in another video. Thanks for watching. Good luck. Happy podcasting. Thanks for your time, attention, and intention.